let us understand software development lifecycle and the role of a DevOps engineer in the SDLC process. So, um, if you are trying to become a DevOps engineer, understanding software development lifecycle would actually make it easy for you to understand the day-to-day life of a DevOps engineer. So, software SDLC is basically a set of steps or principles that every company or every team takes to plan, build, test, release, and maintain software. This is the official definition. So, over 95% of companies today run some sort of software. It could be internal software, it could be external software, right? And there is a process that these companies take to develop this software, release it, maintain it. Um, Let me use an example of a house, right? If you are trying to construct a house, you don't just wake up one day and construct a house, right? Just like all of these modern day applications that we use today, Instagram, Uber Eats, Netflix, Amazon, they didn't just wake up one day and build a giant application. There is a process that most companies follow, which is what we are trying to understand. Like, let's say you are trying to build a house. In the example I was trying to explain, you don't wake up one day and just build the structure. So there is typically 7 phases in SDLC. Some companies do make it 6. So with a house, you would typically start with the planning phase, right? You have to know what type of house you're trying to build. Are you trying to build a condo, right? So during the planning phase, you try to understand, are you trying to build a condo? Are you trying to build a duplex? Are you trying to build, and you also try to look into the location, like, okay, where you are trying to build a house, what is the risk of building the house? This land, once you look at everything, you start gathering requirements. It could be permits you need for the zone where you're trying to build a land. It could be that you need $2 million or $100,000 or $50,000. So once you gather all your requirements, now you go hire an architect. An architect would design the house. There's people who specialize with designing homes, right? So an architect makes a plan. You have back and forth meetings with him. You're okay with the design. Then your architect now you take that design plan for your home and you go to a construction engineer. The construction engineer would build or construct your home based off the design that the architect did design. And after he constructs the home, you move to a testing phase, right? During the construction process, remember you're going to be installing doors, windows, panels, and guys, remember this is the house analogy, right? So once you test that and make sure that power supply is working well, water supply is working, all the doors are working, the outlets, appliances in the home like toilets, pots, faucets are working, right? What happens is you proceed to deploy the home. Deployment, so the construction engineer would deploy the home, which means that he would basically release the home to you, right? You hired him for the home. Once the home gets released to you, you have multiple options. You could put the home on rent or you could live in the home. Regardless of what you do, someone's going to live in the home. And once they start living in the home, we get into the maintenance and support phase, right? Because things can break in the home. Power supply could be out, water supply could be out, things break and they need to be fixed and the home needs to be maintained. So that's the maintenance phase. So same thing goes on with software. So like I said, Uber, DoorDash, Netflix, all of these applications, you don't wake up one day, right, and start writing millions of line of code to build Amazon marketplace or to build Instagram or Netflix or DoorDash. There is a process. So it starts with planning. Now, most companies, when they are trying to develop software, they go through these 7 steps. Um, some companies will actually combine the first and second step into a single step, right? They do the planning and requirements. So when we are trying to develop software, we start with establishing, okay, this software we are developing, what problem would this software be fixing? Like, are there enough users or people that this e-commerce application would be serving? Now, okay, let's look into the possibilities of developing an MVP, which is a minimum viable product for testing, right? So once we have concluded with our research analysis, which this phase is being done by business users or the business end users, which in corporate we call them stakeholders. So Guys, stakeholders are just decision makers or people who go to research into like a product. Let's say we wanted to build what example can I use? Let's say we wanted to sell computers in New York, for example. We have to research and make sure that, okay, how many people are selling computers in New York right now? Is there really a market for selling computers in New York? And maybe there is a market or a demand for computers in New York, but the cost price of us buying and selling computers in New York doesn't make sense. So once we get those analyses, we would stop the whole process here. There will be no point in building an e-commerce application to go sell computers in New York, right? But now we first have to go through this planning phase and gather. So after we've conducted in New York, if we see that we would have a profit selling computers through our e-commerce website in New York, we say, okay, let's gather the requirements. What do we need to have an e-commerce application that sells computers in New York? We would see that, okay, we need a state permit, we need X license or whatever. So are we able to get these permits and licenses? And say how much would we spend to get these licenses? So all these business users at the forefront, right, of the company gather all these requirements. And once all of these stakeholders are okay with all the requirements they got, they say, okay, let's proceed with developing our application. We think our model is viable, right? Let me change this color because now I'm talking about software. So in case you're still on the screen, right? So yeah, we validated that our business proposal is valid, right? So we proceed now to having a UI, which is basically user interface and user experience designs. We proceed to start having a lot of meetings with them, the business users, right? Trying to have them, okay, we want to create an e-commerce application. Can you design a front end? We want the interface to look like this or like that, just like interface of application changes. We want the user experience to be like that. Once you click from this tab, we want the user to go to this tab, and if this tab is not like that, they come back to this tab. So we design all of that, right? Once they design, just like you designing, just like an architect was designing the layout for building your building, same thing with software. We design the layout for the software or application that we are trying to build. After the design, the developers now come into place. Mind you, during all of this stage, a DevOps engineer has nothing to do with all of this, right? DevOps or cloud engineers have nothing to do at this phase. During the development phase, what happens is the developers now would take the design from the user interface and the user experience designers, and based off that design, they will start writing the code and logic. They start building the software using the tech stack. So they will start building software to match the design that has been done here. So once they start building the software, right, which is they build software by writing code. As they are writing the code, um, after writing the code, we get into a testing phase where we have QA or QE engineers. Different companies call them different. It could be quality assurance or quality engineers, right? So um, nowadays, a lot of this part is being tested, but this is just a video for understanding SDLC. So as DevOps engineers, we have automated tests. We set up this as well. But what you should understand is testing is really a duty of QA engineers, right? And sometimes they still to today perform a lot of manual tests. So, but what happens here is they would test the code that is written by the developers, making sure that the performance and the code quality is high, making sure the code does not have any vulnerabilities and the code works exactly the way we intend for the code to work. So QA engineer and QE engineers test our code, but they don't actually make sure that this e-commerce application that we want to use for selling computers in New York, they are not responsible for making sure that that application would be accessible to customers or end users in New York so they could access it. So that is where now a DevOps engineer would be responsible for making sure that this code that has been tested and is working properly should be released as an application to production. And he would a DevOps engineer does this by creating what we call CI/CD pipelines. So pipelines are basically something in IT or a tool or orchestration that we use as DevOps engineers, where as the developer is writing his code, automatic tests are being run. As automatic tests are being run, once the tests are being confirmed that okay, everything works well, that code is being deployed to production. Production just means like to the end user, to the world. Once you are on Instagram as the end user, as a client, that you are accessing Instagram's production server, right? So once it gets deployed, now let's say we want updates or fixes or something is being wrong with the application, it goes into the maintenance and support phase. A DevOps engineer is also still very active in this phase, like during the deployment. Once these applications get released, there might be bugs, and a lot of times there are really issues after every release. So once there are issues, we, a DevOps engineer, and the developers, he works in as a DevOps or cloud engineer. You work in collaboration with the developers to find out why the application is not working as planned or why it broke and what is wrong, so you try to fix it. And also, as a DevOps engineer in this phase, you assist with the development and coding for the developers. So you don't do that by writing code. You don't write code to build the application. But what you do is, in our previous videos, we talked about how software always runs on hardware. So you act, part of your duties is infrastructure creation of servers and environments, so that the development team and the developers can write the code and be able to do their work. And guys, SDLC is an ongoing process. It never stops. So after the code is released, they are always breaking changes. Whenever they are breaking changes, this happens again. Just like Amazon always releases new features, Uber releases new features, Uber Eats. Um, Uber has, like, let's say every time there's a release, it always starts with the stakeholders and the business end users. They're like, okay, we want to release. So for example, in our example, right, let's say we started with computers, right, and the business keeps going so well, so smooth, and we want to expand now to start selling. We want to add a feature on our e-commerce application so that we not only sell computers, we want to also start selling bicycles. So we want to add a feature for bicycles. I know it's unrelated, but this is just for simplicity. So what will happen is we would first start by having our business end users as analyze and see for the feasibility. Once they see that, okay, once they agree that the idea of adding bicycles as a product to our e-commerce application is viable, we proceed to the requirement phase. After we gather our requirements, we proceed to the design how the bicycle microservice would be integrated to our existing e-commerce application. Once we decide how we would add that design, we move to the next stage, which is having the developers write the logic and the code for the bicycle microservice. And after that, that code is tested not only for how the code runs independently, but also for how the code runs with the other code to sell computers on our e-commerce application. And once all the tests are ran, and we see that there are no breaking changes and it runs fine, a DevOps engineer now creates a deployment and a release of that feature, and that is how it gets released on our website. So this is an ever ongoing process, and as a DevOps engineer, you spend a lot of your time here. But once you understand the planning phase, requirement phase, and design phase, and I'm going to tell you this, a lot of DevOps and cloud engineers don't understand this phase. They spend their time just writing code and doing the deployments and just being robots and mastering how to write commands. And I don't say this to blame them. I say this to blame the knowledge or where they actually learned or study. So there's a lot of information about DevOps and cloud on the internet. But of course, whenever there's an abundance of information, you tend to start having misinformation and people who don't really teach well, in my opinion. So understand this, and it would make your life as easy as a DevOps engineer. And when you go to interviews, you get more respect talking about what you do on a day-to-day basis and explaining your work from a business and user standpoint. And nobody wants to hear about Terraform and Kubernetes. Guys, we all know those things, but understand SDLC so that you can really understand what you are doing at your job. It could be a service-based company, it could be a product-based company, it could be just like I said, service-based, product-based, it could be internal software, it could be a healthcare company. All of this, SDLC, any sort of software, it is the same thing. Understand this, and it's going to start making your life easy. See you in the next video.